haven't closed my eyes in 42 days. The clinic in Zurich called it the Somnus Node. It was a piece of neural architecture the size of a grain of rice injected directly into the brainstem. Its function was elegant in its brutality. It intercepted adenosine, the chemical that builds up in the cerebral spinal fluid to induce fatigue, and neutralized it completely. The doctors promised a life free from the biological tax of sleep. I paid them a fortune to buy back a third of my lifespan. For the first month I was a god. I watched the sun set and rise without a single yawn, my mind a sharp, crystalline engine of productivity. The nights were mine, vast oceans of uninterrupted time. I painted the living room, finished projects that had languished for years, and read entire libraries. I felt no exhaustion, no brain fog, no heavy eyelids. The machine of my body functioned with absolute, terrifying perfection. The clinic had assured me the brain would adapt, performing its necessary cellular repairs in waking microcycles. They were wrong. The body didn't adapt, it compromised. The horror began on day 35, not with a feeling of tiredness, but with a sudden, absolute loss of physical autonomy. I was standing in the kitchen, holding a paring knife, peeling an apple in the bright afternoon sunlight. Without warning, my right arm simply ceased to exist in my mental map. It didn't go numb. It didn't cramp. It suffered a complete neural disconnect. The muscles locked, the knife suspended inches from my chest. I stared at my frozen limb. I tried to command my fingers to open, to drop the blade, but the motor pathways were severed. Then the paralysis spread. It moved like cold cement down my spine, locking my ribs, my pelvis, my knees. I stood perfectly rigid in the center of the kitchen, entirely conscious, entirely awake, and entirely trapped inside a body that had shut down. It was atonia, the chemical mechanism the brain uses to paralyze the body during deep sleep so you don't act out your dreams. My brain, denied the unconscious release it desperately needed, was forcing the sleep cycle upon my waking flesh. I stood there, a prisoner behind my own eyes, staring at the blank white wall above the sink. Because I could not close my eyes to dream, the dream had no choice but to project itself into the waking world. The plaster of the kitchen wall began to warp. The flat, white surface stretched outward, the texture of the paint stretching like synthetic skin over a massive, emerging shape. A face was pushing through the drywall. It was immense, devoid of features save for deep, shadowed craters where eyes should be, its surface the color of wet ash. It didn't move toward me, it simply occupied the space, its massive presence bending the light in the room. I could see the dust motes drifting through it. I was experiencing a full, vivid hypnagogic hallucination, superimposed over my reality while entirely paralyzed. I tried to look away, but my ocular muscles were locked forward. I was forced to stare into the featureless ash-gray face as the shadows in my kitchen elongated into the shapes of tall, thin figures gathering in the corners of my peripheral vision. They stood perfectly still, their elongated heads brushing the ceiling, watching me. The episode lasted for exactly 90 minutes, the exact duration of a standard REM cycle. When the chemical paralysis finally receded, the figures vanished and the wall snapped back to a flat plane of drywall. My muscles engaged all at once, my hands spasmed, dropping the paring knife. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, staring at the blade on the linoleum. I knew then that the Somnus Node wasn't a cure, it was a dam, and the reservoir of my dreams was overflowing into the daylight. The attacks accelerated. By day 40, the 90-minute paralysis cycles were hitting me without warning in the grocery store aisle, sitting in my parked car, standing under the showerhead. I became a statue, forced to watch my own nightmares bleed into the waking world. The tall, thin figures from the kitchen were no longer confined to the periphery of my vision. With each cycle, they moved closer. I tried to contact the Zurich clinic. The phone number led to a dead line. The patient portal had been wiped from the server. I was entirely alone with the hardware buried deep in my cervical spine. On the 42nd night, I stood before the bathroom mirror. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at the ruin of my own face. The Somnus Node kept my consciousness razor sharp, but my physical form was decaying from the lack of cellular rest. My skin was the color of old wax, stretched tight over my cheekbones. My eyes were bruised sinks of ruptured capillaries. Then the familiar cold cement poured down my spine. The atonia hit fast, my fingers locked around the porcelain edge. My jaw went rigid. I was paralyzed instantly, my posture frozen, my ocular muscles locked straight ahead into the glass. I waited for the gray face to push through the bathroom tiles. I waited for the tall figures to crowd the narrow space behind my back. But the room and the mirror remained empty. The horror wasn't behind me, it was in front of me. In the glass, my reflection blinked. I hadn't blinked, my real eyelids were paralyzed open, stinging under the harsh vanity lights. The thing in the mirror looked exactly like me, but it possessed a heavy, suffocating lethargy that I couldn't feel. Its shoulders slumped, its chest heaved with a desperate, crushing exhaustion. While I remained frozen, a prisoner of the chemical lock, my reflection slowly raised its right hand. It brought its fingers to the back of its neck, right over the vertebrae where the Zurich surgeons had implanted the node. I watched in absolute visual terror as the reflection dug its nails deep into its own flesh. Blood, thick and dark, welled up from the lacerations and spilled down its collar. It was performing crude surgery on itself. I felt the phantom agony. A sharp, tearing sensation bloomed at the base of my real skull, perfectly mirroring the violence happening in the glass. The reflection was digging through the muscle layers, searching for the implant. It paused and locked its bruised, heavy eyes with mine. Its gaze was weighted with malice and a profound, ancient fatigue. It didn't just want the device out, it wanted to go to sleep, and my waking mind was the only thing holding it hostage. The reflection's bloodied fingers gripped something deep within its neck. It clamped its jaw shut, the muscles in its forearms straining. It pulled. A jagged line of pure, blinding agony severed my vision, and the lights in the bathroom vanished into a solid wall of black. The darkness fractured into the harsh, blinding glare of the bathroom vanity lights. I was lying on the cold tile floor. The chemical paralysis had receded, leaving me with full control of my limbs but replacing the atonia with a deep, radiant agony at the base of my skull. I pushed myself up onto my knees. The room spun wildly. I reached a trembling hand to the back of my neck, right below the hairline. My fingers touched torn flesh. They came away slick with thick, dark blood. I traced the edges of a jagged, open wound. It was a precise excavation. The Somnus Node was gone. The hallucination in the mirror hadn't just been a visual projection. It had been a violent, physical manifestation of my body's desperation. It had reached across the boundary of the glass and performed the extraction. With the hardware removed, the dam broke. The adrenaline of the injury evaporated in seconds, and the physical reality of 42 days of wakefulness slammed into my nervous system like a concrete wall. My limbs turned to lead, my vision darkened at the edges, tunneling until I could barely see my own hands. The immense, crushing weight of a month and a half of accumulated sleep debt was finally demanding payment. I didn't look at the mirror. I couldn't bear to see what was left of me. I dragged myself to my feet, bracing my weight against the doorframe, and stumbled down the hall toward the bedroom. Every step required a monumental effort of will. My mind was shutting down, the neurons misfiring as the brain prepared to plunge into a comatose state of recovery. I reached the edge of the bed and let my body fall forward onto the mattress. The sheets felt impossibly soft. The relief was absolute. My eyelids, pulled taut for over 1,000 hours, began to close. But as my vision narrowed to a final, heavy slit, I noticed the geometry of the room was wrong. The angle was inverted. The wardrobe was on the left instead of the right. The bedroom door was on the wrong wall, and I wasn't looking up at the ceiling. I was looking straight ahead. I tried to sit up to turn my head, but the familiar cold cement poured down my spine. The atonia hit me instantly. My ribs locked, my jaw froze. I was entirely rigid, standing perfectly upright. I was looking out through the glass of the bedroom floor mirror. Through the pane, I watched the physical space of my room. I watched a man who wore my face lying heavy on the mattress. The bloody wound on the back of his neck stained the white pillowcase. I watched his chest rise and fall as he slipped immediately into a deep, heavy slumber. The reflection hadn't just removed the implant, it had executed a swap. It took the physical flesh to finally pay the biological debt it was owed. I tried to thrash, to break the glass, to claw my way back into my own life, but the paralysis was absolute. I am trapped behind the silver backing, a prisoner in a reversed room. I am entirely conscious, completely frozen, and condemned to stay awake forever while my body sleeps.